Hello, welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Death. I'm Fran Solomon.
And I'm Andy McNeil.
And we're thrilled to be your host for these conversations. Let's Talk Death is brought to you by Heal Grief, a social support network creating community after someone has died. Everything we do is inspired by our core belief that no one should ever grieve alone.
Our goal with this program is to have a friendly chat with some amazing people. This way we can help normalize and educate our Heal Grief community. Our guest today is Dr. Sharon Prentice. Dr. Prentice is a psychotherapist and spiritual counselor whose work focuses on helping patients process the grief of losing a loved one. Becoming Starlight is her memoir of healing from the devastating loss of her daughter and husband. She experienced a unique spiritual experience known as shared death experience, which gave her a peek into foreverness and a sense of peace that was otherworldly.
Dr. Prentice, welcome to Let's Talk Death, and we're honored to have you here with us.
Well, thank you, Fran. I'm really excited to be talking with you today. I've looked forward to this because I think that the work that you do and a lot of my colleagues do is so very important, getting the word out about grief and all of the things that go into that.
Yeah. Sharon, would you be willing to share with our listeners of your personal journey with grief and loss and the impact this has had on your life?
You know, it's funny. So many people have asked me about this. It's my own fault because I do this kind of work. When I find myself talking about this, sometimes I think of that young girl that went through all of that. And I am still amazed to this day that I'm sitting here talking to people because surviving it. I mean, seriously, surviving it was very difficult. And talking about it, I almost feel like I'm talking about somebody else because the grief and the trauma and the despair, although I lived it, healing from that was a really difficult thing to do. But what happened to me? Death, as I'm sure the two of you know, is supposed to come in order. You know, we are supposed to bury our great-grandparents and then our grandparents and then our parents and sisters, brothers, us, then our kids. We never start out burying our first child, and that is exactly what happened to me. My daughter died in my arms 2 hours after she was born. I had no place in my body, not one cell in my body could accept that. You know, I had no place to put it because no one had ever talked to me about death and grieving and all of those things. My great-grandparents were still alive. I had never experienced it. So when my daughter died, the journey through her death was extremely difficult because I reached out to a God that I thought I knew. You know, the God that of my childhood I had been taught about, you know, the guy that lives out there somewhere totally separate and apart from us. And I begged and I bargained and all the things that people do when they don't know what else to do. And when none of that worked and she died, I was left full of just total emptiness and rage and bitterness. And at the same time, my husband, who was in the military, was getting sick and no one knew what was wrong with him. So long story short, it was an 8-year ordeal where he also died. And what saved me, really seriously saved my life, was at the moment of his death. I was brought along for what I call a peek into foreverness. I think God threw me a bone because when my husband got to where he was supposed to be, it was like, hey, can we show her what this is all about? Because if we don't, she is not going to survive this. So I had what's called a shared death experience, which is exactly like a near-death experience, except the person going on that journey is not dying, is not ill, is, none of that. They are usually totally healthy. And it is just this invite to come along and witness the aftermath of physical death. So that was my journey through grief and death and dying. I didn't do a very good job of it in the beginning at all. I didn't do a very good job of it because I had no one to talk to and I had no wherewithal to deal with any of it.
Wow. You talk about your connection to God, and I see that you are a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
How did the death change your commitment or faith, did it change your commitment or faith?
Absolutely. It completely altered everything that I had believed my entire life. What I found was that this concept of God and heaven and hell and all of these things that had been presented to me from the time I was a child. I was raised in the church. And matter of fact, my mom was a minister and my uncle is a minister. And all of these people my whole life were saying, this is the truth. This is what you will believe. And going through, especially with my daughter's death, I realized that it didn't fit. It didn't make any sense. There wasn't, when I reached out to this God that I thought was real, I found that what I had thought all my life was not real. And it took me those 8 years of the journey up to my husband's death to realize that everything I had believed in, it was all false. And I discovered during that shared death experience that God lives in me and I live in him, and that I exist because I am the very thought of him, and he breathes life into that thought, and that's why I exist, and that's why all of you exist. So it totally altered everything that I had ever believed in the past and going forward. It totally different. I felt that organized religion, and I know this gets some people very upset when I mention organized religion, but I think they miss the mark. I think there's so much control within that people get stuck in exactly what I got stuck in, thinking that God was this outside entity and that I had total access to him by, looking up and doing whatever the church always told you to do. That didn't work for me. And during that experience, the shared death experience, that was when I realized what my truth would be from that moment on.
So can you explain the differences in what we call your post-traumatic growth in the 8 years of grieving from your daughter to your husband's death, and then how that was different, if it was different?
It was different. It was very different. When my daughter died, that was when I fell away. Everything that I always thought I was, everything that I had believed in, my entire identity within my life just fell away. There was nothing left except this angry, bitter, rageful, just empty hull of a person. And there wasn't anybody that I could talk to that understood how I felt. The ministers I went to didn't understand. My family tried the best they could. I lost a lot of friends during that time because no one knew what to do with me. And I represented something to them that they didn't want to admit could happen. Losing a child. People, there's always, there are labels, you lose parents, you're an orphan, you lose husband and wife, widow, widower, all those labels. But when you lose a child, there's no label. There has not ever been, in any language that I know of, where anyone has said, you lose a child, that makes you this. What it does is make you kind of an outcast, because no one knows what to say to you. And they try. I got to give people credit. They try. But they come up with things like, God knows best. Well, to me, there wasn't a God. And if there was a God, he or she or whatever this thing was the most evil entity that existed in the universe. And then they would say, you'll have more children. Dad, no, no. And people, people in our society especially, they don't know how to handle grief because we're not taught how to handle this. And we are told, look for closure. In my book, closure is a myth because all it does is keep you grounded in the very thing you're trying to get rid of and get over. So I never tell people to look for closure. But so when I was grieving the loss of my daughter, I had nowhere to go. I had nothing to pin any hopes on or to pin any joy or hope or anything on. I was alone. Okay, I was alone. And then at the moment of my husband's death, I was that way for 8 years until my husband died. And having that experience, I realized that I wasn't alone, that I was never alone, that I was experiencing what I believe to be what the mystics always talk about, you know, that heart of hearts where the divinity that lives within you is always there. And I had shut that out. Okay, I caused the separation between me and what God, and I always use the word God. I don't say source or creation or any of that. To me, it is God, because that's what I found. I caused the separation, and I wouldn't listen because I was so full of anger and so full of despair. And, you know, you can get so deep down in the muck and the mire that all you're doing is breathing in this muck and you don't know how to get out of it. But I was literally pulled out of that. So my grief and my rage and my anger and all of those horrible, you know, that despair, that was taken away from me during that experience. I did nothing to get rid of it. Where I was, God just took it away because he showed me what my truth would be and how I could help other people understand that you are never alone, and there's always hope, and there's always joy, and there's always gratitude. So it was really a big difference for me, what I call the before time and the after time.
Yeah, it sounds like that period of 8 years was really a journey of hopelessness. Like it was just, a sense of not being able to see kind of beyond whatever is in front of me. And it's interesting how when we get caught in, I'm from the deep South, and so we had a phrase where my mom would say all the time, "You're stuck in a rut." You know,
that was it.
That word,
that was
right.
it.
And we just get stuck in that rut, and it keeps feeding because that's all we're seeing. That's what we're feeding ourselves with. It really sounds like that experience was a turnkey for you to just open this door of hope and light, and you know, all the things that we so often get robbed of when we're so tormented by our pain and our grief.
You know what it was? It was surrender. Facing your mortality is one thing. Facing the mortality of those you love is something else altogether. And I tried to control it all. You know, this human condition that we're all in, we think, okay, you know, this, of course, it's ego talking, but I am going to control all of it. I set up this battle, you know, with God and with death, and I was going to beat them at their own game because I figured if I could control it all. I know, I look back on it now, like I said, I look back and I think, did I really do all of that? It was such a control feature for me because I thought if I could control it, nothing bad could happen. So you're right, in that 8 years, I did not want to see anything else except the anger and the bitterness and this war I had set up, because if I gave up even one iota of control or strength over to something else, to me, that meant I would be losing this battle. And it wasn't until my husband took that last breath and I realized I had lost, that this complete surrender, just surrender, came over me. And I think that's when God says, all right, I got you now. You're going to stop this crap and I'm going to show you everything that's going on. And that's exactly what I think happened to me. But I had to be, I'm a stubborn little cuss. And I think I had to realize that surrender was not failure. And for me, it was the beginning of life and hope and joy again.
Well, and so you made some decisions at that point, just in your own life. It sounds like, looking at your bio and your history and reading up a little bit on things that you've done in your life, you went and studied, went back to school, you studied, you earned degrees, a lot has happened since then. I wonder if you could share a little bit of that with our listeners.
Sure. You know, I never say that this was something I absolutely wanted to do. It was something I had to do. And a lot of things went into those decisions because I told myself that I would never let anyone be alone. I would never let anyone be alone as they were dying, or the family members that were with their loved one as they transitioned, because that was the hardest. It was the hardest thing imaginable. And if I could ever stop anyone from being alone as they were going through that process, and I was going to be the person that did that. I had to go back to school because I had to have the tickets to be able to get into the room. You know, if you don't have the tickets, they don't let you in the room. Okay.
Right. Got to have those credentials. Yeah. Yeah.
You got to
You're right.
have them.
Yeah.
And that's why I kept doing that, going from one to the other to the other. And I'm a forever student. But, you know, I could have probably done this without the degrees and all that, but you can't get in the door unless you say, here, look, okay, I've got the pieces of paper that you guys want. So that's why I did all of that. And it just really grew organically, so that my patient population were the people who needed my story. They needed to know my story. And so that's why I do what I do.
Yeah.
Didn't have any choice. You know,
Right.
didn't have any
Right.
choice. It felt too selfish to not give to someone else, because I can see the suffering. It's in the eyes, you know, and in our society, we don't teach people. And you have to be taught. It's just like love. Everyone says love comes naturally. No, it doesn't. You got to be taught, you know, and grief and death and dying and the process of grief versus the actual moment of death, the process of dying rather. You got to be taught all of those things to understand how to react to it, instead of sitting there quietly and not saying a word and making sure everything is, you know, absolute silence. That's not what the person who is passing needs. The person needs to know that their family is going to be just fine. And the only way to do that is to continue on, you know, talking and laughing and joking and doing all of the things that you would normally do with that person, so then they can pass knowing that I'm leaving everybody okay. Yeah, it's going to rip their hearts out, but they're going to be okay.
Right.
It's a great gift to leave someone as they pass into death. Yeah. And it's also a great gift for those that will become bereft. I mean, it's not taking away the grief that they're going to experience, but it's giving them the opportunity to really begin with a healthy grief journey.
Yeah, and that is what helps you thrive afterwards. I did not have that when my daughter died. And like I said, I became somebody that I didn't even want to be around, you know, because I was dark, and I just lived in these dark places. I did not know how to get out of them. And if I had had somebody there to say to me, I'm here, and then just be quiet, you know, just I'm here, and I could look into their eyes and see that they meant it. And one of the things that I tell people is, I think the process of death and dying is the most sacred time of all in our lives. It's not birth. It's not any of those. It is that dying process and the actual transition. And if you can be part of that and in help in any way whatsoever, it is so incredibly sacred to the person leaving and the family to be able to look back on that and be able to smile again. You know, I have to leave the room sometimes when I lose patients, because my first reaction is to smile. And you can't do that, you know, when people have just had their hearts ripped out. But the reason I do that is because my first thought is, now they know, because they are in that place that I got a peek of. And I think now they know. And it actually makes me jealous sometimes. And I try to hitchhike rides back to that place, but of course it never happened, you know. But it's such a sacred time, and giving to the families that are left behind, so they can thrive again. In our society, we need that. That's why we need people like you guys, because you're out there and you teach people how to do this, and you talk to them and you teach them, and it's so important.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Sharon, or Dr. Prentice, thank you so much.
Call me Sharon. When people say Dr. Prentice, I look behind me to see who's back there. Everybody calls me Sharon. I'm actually known as a sweatshirt doc, because all I wear is sweatshirts. And the reason for that is, when you're dealing with people who are on chemo and people are crying on you and vomiting on you and all of those things, it's easier just to wear sweatshirts. Yeah. So I have every sweatshirt in every color you can think of. So people call me sweatshirt doc. I love that. I just really do. So,
well, I love it. It also helps connect with people too.
Yeah,
it's more down to earth, and when
you're walking in a white coat, you know, there is white coat syndrome, and people tense up, and I don't want anybody tensing up with me. So I'm just,
they want the
call
human.
me Sharon, and I'm happy.
They want the human.
Right. Well, Sharon, I was going to say that thank you for being with us, and we only have a few minutes left, but we wanted to give you a chance to share with our listeners, if there's someone out there who wants to connect with you or connect with your work, how would they go about doing that?
Usually people, I am by referral only because I can't possibly deal with everybody, but how people can get in touch with me personally, not through their doctor, is they can go to my website, www.sharonprentice.com. Send me a message. I answer every single message. It takes me a while because I get a lot of them, but I answer them all. And I figure if people want to reach out to me, take their time to do that, I'm going to take my time to respond to them. You can also get me on my Facebook page, Sharon Prentice, PhD. Send me private messages there. There's 35,000 of us on there, so you can imagine the number of messages I get. But once again, I spend a great deal of time every day trying to get back to all of those people. And then, Twitter, and I just started on Instagram. I'm not an expert in social media by any means of the imagination, but people are always asking me, are you on here, you're on there? So I try and give everybody every, avenue that I can so that they can ask their questions of me and see if I can help them at all. And
Sharon, where can they get your book?
If you want to get my book, you can find it just about any place. It's on, of course, Amazon.com. It's a book, Barnes & Noble, all the indie stores. You can get it through my website. You can, if you want it, all you got to do is type in Becoming Starlight, and up it comes. It's obnoxiously everywhere. So, it was originally written just for my patients because they all asked me, could you please write this down so when we're not together, I'll have something to go back and read. But it just kind of took off and has reached the grief community and the deaf and dying community, which I'm extremely blessed to say people are getting help from, and especially people who have lost children. And that to me was the whole purpose for writing Starlight.
Sharon, thank you so much for being our guest on Let's Talk Death and for sharing your journey and the story behind your book.
Well, thank you for having me. This was great. I enjoyed talking to you so much.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. And thank you to those who are joining us for this episode of Let's Talk Death. If you would like to learn more about Heal Grief, please visit us at healgrief.org. At healgrief.org, you can learn more about all the programs and resources of Heal Grief, including our national network of support of grieving young adults called Actively Moving Forward.
Make sure to sign up on healgrief.org to receive our newsletter for links to future episodes of Let's Talk Death.
And again, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time on Let's Talk Death.